Let me start out with a question, and I want you to think about this before you answer it. If everyone lived like you, what type of system would we have? What type of system? Would it be something that gets stronger or weaker, better or worse? And I'm not talking about the government or your relationships or work. What I'm talking about is your emotional life, your personal life. If everyone showed up the way you showed up, if everyone carried what you carried, or they avoided what you avoid, how would things be? Would things be getting better, or would they quietly be falling apart and disintegrating? Because here's something most people don't like to face. There is nothing neutral in life, and you can't take a neutral position. You're either for this or against it. You might be strongly for it or weakly for it, but you're going to be for or against things. And you're either carrying the weight, and by that I mean you're carrying the weight, or you're becoming the weight, or you are the weight. Those are the two choices. You're either carrying the weight, or you are becoming the weight. And I know that sounds a bit harsh, and I'm not trying to be judgmental, but it's how systems work. Everything that stays alive and thrives requires contribution. And everything that stops contributing, those systems, they begin to decay. Now let me slow down a little bit, because this isn't about guilt, pressure, or blame. It's about cause and effect. Because cause and effect is such a simple yet fundamental basis of life. And once you see the pattern that I'm going to show you, you can't unsee it. And once you see it, you start to recognize it everywhere. Not just in history, not just in society, but in your own personal life. Every system, whether it's biological, social, or your own personal one, it operates on two primary forces: production and consumption. And contribution leads to benefits, effort that leads to rewards. And beneath all this is one simple law: effort must be connected to outcome. And when you disconnect effort from outcome, you get all kinds of trouble. Or the system is just going to decay. And it's not because people are bad or lazy. It's just because we adapt and we find what's easier. Now, when effort matters, when what you do really matters, then people rise. When it doesn't matter, when your effort doesn't matter, your initiative fades, your motivation goes down, responsibility weakens, and engagement disappears or just drops significantly. And this doesn't happen dramatically. That's the critical thing you need to understand. This is slow. It's like that analogy of a frog in cold water, and then you heat it up to a boil, and the frog doesn't jump out because it doesn't notice the heat rising. And this is the same thing going on here. This is changing and adapting, but it's quiet and it's slow, and this is why most people don't notice it until it's already advanced. Many of you know that I'm a history person and I love history. One of the stories that I've looked at multiple times, from economic perspectives, from historical, from personal narratives, is the Jamestown settlement, the first British colony in North America. And in there, they had this noble idea in the beginning that sounded very humane and a good idea. And that was, let's pool everything together and let's work together for the common good. So they had shared labor, shared food, shared outcomes, shared contribution. And on paper and in theory, it sounded really good. But in reality, it collapsed. Why? Because when one person decides they're not going to give 100% effort and they go down in their effort, they don't really feel the pain. They don't notice the change. So imagine that you had a plate, and on that plate it was 100% full. It had meat and vegetables and all the things on there. And someone had been chopping wood, someone had been working in the garden. But then when one person decides, I'm just going to go chill and relax and not do too much, their plate might go down from 100% to 99.5%. You're not even really going to notice it. But that person had all this free time and they disconnected their work and their effort from their consumption and their rewards. And so the person doesn't really see a big loss. It's like, no big deal. I'm not having to work and I'm still getting the rewards of food and shelter and everything else that the community provided. But what happens is other people start noticing that and they start seeing, well, hey, if this guy over here is slacking or not working, why am I putting in all this effort? Why am I putting all this work? Why am I contributing? And so motivation starts dying out across this colony here in Jamestown. And it's not instantly, but it's quietly, and contribution keeps dropping and dropping, and trust erodes. And eventually resentment builds up because you got some people that aren't contributing and others that are. And if you look at the early history of Jamestown, there's starvation, there is all kinds of problems that they're having, and no one necessarily wanted this, but when you disconnect personal responsibility from the outcome, you get this type of result. Now, when they reinstituted that, when they reinstituted private property, private ownership, personal responsibility, effort tied to the reward, what happened is contribution, your own personal contribution, it rose and people started surviving. Output surged, starvation stopped, and this is not an ideology, it's simple cause and effect. Now let's bring this home to you personally. Think of a time where you took full responsibility for something that really mattered, something that was important. And not that it was necessarily easy. You might have had things that were a struggle with this, but you owned it. And when it was uncomfortable, you still owned it. And this could be with your health, your job, a project, a relationship you worked on, a mistake you had, something like this. And it might have not gone perfectly, even if the result was something you didn't want. But ask yourself this question: did your options expand or did they shrink? Did you become more capable? Did you become more or less when you took on that responsibility, regardless of what the outcome was? Now, think of another time when you avoided responsibility. Maybe you blamed your circumstances or blamed the government or the economy, or you waited for someone else to take charge, or you hoped that someone else would just fix this or it would go away. And maybe nothing terrible happened, nothing blew up, but if I ask you the same question, did your options expand or shrink? Did you become more capable or less capable? Most people already know the answer, but think about that for yourself. Did you shrink or expand based on if you took full responsibility or if you avoided responsibility? I really want to stress this, that your growth was not necessarily tied to winning or losing, success or failure. It was literally tied to, did you take ownership? Did you take ownership of the situation or not? And the more you took ownership and responsibility, the more likely you have to grow. Now, it might have hurt. It might have been painful. You might have had some growing lessons. But when you didn't take responsibility, when you avoided it, more than likely you would shrink and you'd become less. And even if it felt safe, because self-trust comes from handling life. And when you know you can trust yourself, no matter what happens, you know, I can handle this, I can figure this out. That is when you really are growing. When you're looking for other people to help you, to save you, and I'm not saying you can't have cooperation, you can't need help sometime, but if you're looking at a pattern where you're more taking an avoidance role versus a responsibility role, then that is what's going to limit you or cause you to grow. Psychologists have known this for decades, and a researcher named Ellen Langer in 1981 published research on control, how much control a person has or doesn't have. And what she found is that when people feel agency, and agency is just a fancy way of saying control, when people feel they have control versus when they don't have agency or they don't feel they're in control. And her findings were considered striking at the time. When people believe they have control, even in small ways, what happens was motivation would increase, engagement would go up, health improved, learning accelerated, all these things because people felt that what they're doing mattered and they had this sense of control over what they were doing. Now, the opposite also she studied, and when people lose a sense of control, their initiatives collapse, they take on fewer things, their confidence erodes, they just don't feel like I can do this, and they become very passive. So passivity increases, and their identity weakens. So who you think you are weakens. You become less certain about who you are, what you can do, what's possible. Now, this wasn't about money or intelligence or anything like that. It was about agency and control. Pure and simple, do you feel like you're in control and what you do makes a difference or matters, or if it doesn't? Now, a lot of times we think some people need to be sheltered or helped because we think life is too hard. Now, I'm not saying there isn't times to help someone and we can't support people and do things like that. But as a general pattern, when you think life is hard and your effort isn't going to matter, you can't do it, that is what breaks effort. Because you're thinking it no longer matters, it's no big deal. And that's why self-trust, it comes from being reassurance in yourself. So when you trust yourself, you have that inner knowing, that reassurance that I can make it. And it comes literally from contact with reality. Not sheltered, not filtered, not being propped up, but you actually being engaged with reality and knowing that I have the ability to figure this out and make it. And confidence isn't necessarily a feeling. It's a memory that tells you, I know I can handle this. Many times when people think of the word dependence, they think of financial. Is someone financially dependent on others? But there are other important ways that we are dependent on others. And it's often more subtle and quieter. But there is emotional dependence. And you need someone to regulate your emotions and how you feel. There's also decision dependence. Do you need to depend on other people to make decisions and make your choices for you because you're afraid, I don't want to be wrong, I need their help? There's also comfort dependence, and that's needing to feel ease, like life is easy or not so harsh so that you can function. There's also competence dependence, and this is letting others handle what you could learn and do yourself. Now, all these things add up, and maybe one of those is hitting you, maybe a combination of them, but when you become dependent on others rather than independent yourself, you're literally, when you're dependent, I think of this like a V, and the more dependent you are, the closer at the bottom of the V are, and you have fewer choices, fewer options. And when you get up higher, you have more independence, more autonomy, and more choices. Over time, something incredible happens to people who feel dependent versus people who feel independent. The dependent people, their capabilities actually shrink. What they can do actually goes down. Their self-trust erodes. Their identity weakens. And this is the part that people don't like to hear, but dependency doesn't just take away resources, it takes away your capacity. And on the other hand, when you have more independence, more control that you feel, what happens is your capabilities expand, your self-trust increases, your identity is stronger, and you actually have more capabilities because you're learning and growing and you're not living in a bubble. This is why dependence often feels safer at first, having someone help you, getting support, but then later on it feels suffocating or limiting because you didn't develop the skills, you didn't develop the independence, and so now you feel trapped in a sense. This is the part when I talk to people, they resist. They come up with all kinds of excuses and reasons why this doesn't apply to them or why I'm sounding too harsh or judgmental or critical. But I want you to know something. When you say, I'm okay, I'm fine, this isn't that bad, it's not that big of a deal, I don't need to change, I want you to look at nature and think about water. If you have a body of water that doesn't change, doesn't move, doesn't have flow, it might start out as clean and fresh and fine, but eventually it's going to get stagnant and stale and turn into a swamp. It's going to decay if it's not moving and having flow going into it. A garden that isn't tended to ends up with weeds and a mess, okay? So you need to work at a garden. You have to weed it. You have to plant it. You have to do things. Your body is the same way. If you don't challenge your body physically, either by walking, lifting weights, doing something, then it's not going to stay strong. It actually will weaken. And there's no maintenance mode in life. You're either growing and expanding or you're decaying and going backwards. You may or may not realize it right now, but you have a default future. You have a future that you're heading towards, whether you realize it or not. And progress requires intention. It requires you to make a decision and then follow through with behavior. Regression and going backwards requires nothing. You don't have to do anything, and you're going to do that. So I don't need intention to gain weight. I just need to not think about what I'm eating and just eat, and I'll probably gain weight because I'm not paying attention to the calories I'm intaking. And I don't need intention for my skills to go backwards or to degrade. I don't have to do anything with that. But if I want things to get better, I need to be intentional. I need to be like with my body, I need to think, okay, how am I moving? What am I putting into my mouth? If I want my skills to improve, I have to intentionally look at what am I doing to get better? Where am I challenging myself or not? And otherwise, I'm going to become dependent because the less I do, the less I'm capable of doing, the less I can do for myself. So neglect takes care of all that for me. Neglect shrinks what's possible. It shrinks what my capabilities are. And the only way out of that is through intention and then following through with that intention with action. So for you, you have a choice. do I want to intentionally expand my possibilities, expand my capabilities, and become more independent? Or do I want neglect and no choice to actually limit my capabilities and have me go backwards? And if I'm not intentionally creating a better future for myself, I'm unintentionally creating a smaller one. So hopefully you can see the importance of this, and that life is always going to lead you to be more dependent with fewer options, or more independent with more options. The one is fear-based and it's limiting, and it just eats away at your own personal worth. The other way expands what's capable, expands what you can do, and it expands what's possible for you. Because when you can't take care of the things that matter most to you, you have to outsource those. And this applies to everywhere. It applies to you, an individual, families, organizations, cultures, and countries. Because freedom cannot survive on outsourced responsibility. I want to say that again. Freedom cannot survive on outsourced responsibility. And the more of us that take personal responsibility and ownership, the better we're going to be. The more you can do that for yourself, the better you're going to be. Because then you don't have to worry about what other people are doing or not doing. You know, I can handle this, and I have a strong, independent lifestyle. And again, I'm not saying that you don't need help here and there, but you don't want help here and there to become a permanent lifestyle pattern. As we wrap this up, I want to leave you with one question to ponder. Where in my life am I living off past effort instead of present intention? Where am I living off past effort instead of present intention? Because whatever area that is, that's where you're going to be shrinking and contracting, and it's already probably begun for you. So the good news is life shrinks by default, but it expands by design. And it doesn't have to be heroic. It doesn't have to be something amazing. It's just when you take responsibility and you grab that control that's yours and you take it back and you say, I'm going to build strength. I'm going to grow. I'm going to expand my freedom. And that's how self-trust returns and grows for you. Thanks for watching this video. I wish all the best to you, and have a happy new year.